Welcome to Superhero Pow. I'm your host nerd, Tom Fremgen. And welcome to another edition of Raiders of the Long Box, where we dig into the comic book collection and pull up gems from days gone by. Now, a while back, I did a video about the greatest single issue of the Justice League of America. It was number 200, the anniversary episode. Look it up, it's great. But since I'm such a big Justice League of America fan, it's my jam, the way some people are into the X-Men, today I'm going to talk about the greatest Justice League of America story ever, Crisis on Earth Prime. Before I get into the story, I have to go over a little bit of background. Originally in the 1940s, so to speak, there was the golden age of comic books, with the birth of superheroes. Starting with Superman and then Batman, The Flash, Green Lantern, Wonder Woman. And then years after the superhero bust of the 1950s, the Silver Age rolled in and superheroes were back in vogue. But it wasn't the superheroes of the Golden Age, it was modern updates, reboots, relaunches, replacements, all new, all different heroes. Jay Garrick was no longer the Flash anymore, it was Barry Allen. And even without an internet, fans still wanted to know what the heck happened to Jay. So Julius Schwartz, Gardner Fox, and Carmen Infantino created The Flash of Two Worlds, and the DC Multiverse was born. Jay and all his fellow Golden Age superheroes were alive and well. They were just on another Earth, Earth 2. And the current Silver Age Earth was now dubbed Earth 1. After a few more team-ups, DC finally decided to go whole hog and teamed up the heroes of Earth 2, the Justice Society of America, with the heroes of Earth 1, the Justice League of America, in Crisis on Earth 1/Crisis on Earth 2. It was one story with two different chapter names. Not surprisingly, it proved to be such a big hit that the Justice League and the Justice Society would continue to team up every year until the Justice Society was lost in limbo back in 1986. This is Crisis on the Infinite Earth fallout. But more often than not, whenever the two teams got together, it was a crisis. Crisis on Earth 3, Crisis on Earth X, Crisis on New Genesis, Family Crisis, Super Crisis, etc. and etc. But in 1982, they did the biggest one of them all, and it was a first crossover of series as well. The Justice League of America comic book with the All-Star Squadron comic book for a 5-issue epic. And the title of the story, Crisis on Earth Prime. Now some of you may be wondering, why Crisis on Earth Prime? We got Earth 1 and Earth 2, what's Earth Prime? Well, back in those days, Earth Prime was our Earth, if you will. There were no superheroes on Earth Prime. Okay, you can just shut up about Ultra, okay? And Earth Prime turns out to be the biggest casualty of the storyline. I'll try not to spoil everything, but I will explain in a little bit. First, let's talk about the talent. Since it was a proper crossover between the Justice Society of America comic book and the All-Star Squadron comic book, there were two writers. Jerry Conway, the current writer of the Justice League, and Roy Thomas, the writer of the All-Star Squadron. I don't think the All-Star Squadron ever had a different writer. Roy kind of did the whole series. For the artist, the Justice League's regular artist, industry vet Don Heck, was drawing, and the All-Star Squadron's regular artist was newcomer Jerry Ordway, working off Andrea Gonzalez's breakdowns. For the covers, you had superstar artist George Perez drawing the Justice League of America covers, and iconic artist Joe Kubert drawing the All-Star Squadron covers. Now from that lineup, you can probably tell there is one link in that chain. Don Heck. As I often like to say about some artists, it's not that they're bad, it's just that they really don't do much anything above typical work. Sadly, I also think that this is why Crisis on Earth Prime doesn't get a lot of the credit it's due, because 3 of the 5 issues were drawn by Don Heck. But even with that, Crisis on Earth Prime is still the best Justice League of America story ever. Now, of course, being superhero pow, I'm talking about this is a superhero story that delivers the biggest, baddest superhero story you can imagine. Now, as they said in the comic book, time for the roll call. The Justice League steps up with Superman, Aquaman, Hawkman, Zatanna, and Firestorm. The Justice Society featured Green, Alan Scott, Lantern, Dr. Fate, Starman, Power Girl, and the Huntress, Helen Wayne. And then, since this is a time-traveling story, from the 1940s, we have the All-Star Squadron, which was supposed to be a World War II grouping of all the American superheroes who were not already in the Justice Society of America. But, the All-Star Squadron was also supposed to include the Justice Society of America as well. Basically, it was a mix of any character that Roy Thomas wanted to use at the time. And for this storyline, he went with Johnny Quick, Liberty Bell, Robot Man, Firebrand, Danette Riley, and Commander Steel. Now, who can challenge all those heroes? Well, the big bad guy was Per Degaton, a world-conquering fascist with a time machine. I'll also point out that Degaton was the villain who helped launch the All-Star Squadron series. Backing him up was the Crime Syndicate of America from Earth-3, an evil version of the Justice League of America, featuring Ultraman, Superwoman, Owlman, Johnny Quick, and Power Ring. Now, at this time, we haven't seen these villains since Crisis on Earth-3 back in 1964, where they managed to whip the Justice League and the Justice Society. For you completists out there, yes, Ultraman did show up in a DC Comics Presents annual one time. Superwoman, Johnny Quick, and Power Ring showed up in the Secret Society of Supervillains comic book, but Owlman didn't show up anywhere. Either way, this is the first time we've seen the team in like 20 years. Okay, with all that in place, let's jump into the story with Justice League of America number 207. It all starts with a bang as the Justice League and the Justice Society are starting to get together for their annual party. Basically the story reason for having team-ups every year. But as the Justice Society were transporting themselves to Earth-1, the Crime Syndicate of America shows up in the transporter instead and beats the tar out of the Justice League. What happened to the Justice Society of America? Well, they found themselves transported to a world devastated by nuclear war. Any guesses on what world that is yet? After being whipped by the Crime Syndicate, the League decides they should find out what happened to the Society before they go after the Syndicate. So they travel to Earth-2 and discover that the whole planet is now ruled by the fascist government of Per Degaton. Now we skip over to All-Star Squadron number 14. This issue gives us the lowdown on the villain, Per Degaton, how he gets his time machine and his plans to conquer the world with it, which mainly involves him going into the future and stealing weapons from the future, using them to conquer the world in the past, or his present, 1940. As he's traveling through time, he's discovering that his time machine can also travel between worlds as well, and he finds the prison of the Crime Syndicate of America. The Justice League and the Justice Society had imprisoned the Crime Syndicate in a limbo in between worlds. Degaton finds their prison and frees them. Feeling they owe him a debt, they join him in his mission to steal weapons from the future. And the whole gang winds up in Cuba in the 1960s, more specifically during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Crime Syndicate steals all the nuclear missiles for Per Degaton before they try to double-cross him. But ready for this move, Degaton jettisons them into time-space, where they were intercepted by the beam bringing the Justice Society to Earth-1. So the Crime Syndicate was brought to Earth-1, and the Justice Society was kicked out. Now with nuclear missiles in hand, Per Degaton travels back to the 1940s so he can take over the world. But before that happens, we go over to meet the All-Star Squadron. Hanging out at the Justice Society of America headquarters, they find themselves face to face with the Justice League of America. The Justice League had figured that Per Degaton had conquered the world back in the 1940s, so they time traveled back to the 1940s to see how it happened. Now for the middle issue, Justice League of America number 208. In typical fashion, the All-Star Squadron and the Justice League of America aren't too familiar with each other, and so a brawl ensues. Once it's all cleared up and they learn that they're all superheroes, they decide to go to Washington, D.C. to see if Per Degaton has made his move yet. Meanwhile, we catch up to the Justice Society of America, who had been transplanted on a world devastated by nuclear war. Using Dr. Fate's mystical powers, they learned that back in the 1960s, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the missiles had disappeared. The United States didn't buy Russia's story about superhumans stealing the missiles, and then one thing leads to another, and nuclear war devastates the planet. And this is where we learn the devastated Earth is Earth Prime, our Earth. And that's why the story is called Crisis on Earth Prime. After figuring out what has happened, the Justice Society travels back to Earth 2 into the 1940s to see what has happened. On to the fourth chapter, All-Star Squadron number 15. In typical fashion, Per Degaton blackmails the world for supreme power with his stolen nuclear missiles. But when he becomes aware of all the superheroes amassing against him, he quickly enlists the help of the crime syndicate of America again. Through plot convenience, the superheroes learn where all 4 of Degaton's missile bases are. They break up into 5 teams, and they head out. Then we're treated to several battle royales of the superheroes bashing all of Per Degaton's minions and duking it out with the crime syndicate as well at all 4 bases. Now we move to the final chapter, Justice League of America number 209. With all of Degaton's nuclear missiles accounted for, the heroes regroup and attack his headquarters. And I'm sure it comes as no surprise that the heroes are victorious. But still, what to do about Earth Prime? It's still been devastated by nuclear war. Well, if you were counting, I said that there were 5 teams and 4 missile bases. So, what became of the 5th team of superheroes? Well, they traveled back or forward in time to the 1960s on Earth Prime and attacked the crime syndicate before they could steal the missiles. Then, once all the time paradoxes all settle out, in typical comic book fashion, the Justice League and the Justice Society continue on with their annual get-together party, never knowing the adventure even happened. And there you go. Crisis on Earth Prime. And aside from all the heroes, villains, and crazy plots, I really love how Conway paced this story, having each issue focus on a specific story angle. The first issue drops you into the action, the second issue explains how we got to the action in the first issue, and then the third issue pulls everything together, and then the fourth and the fifth issues give you the climax to the whole thing. You also get each team's perspective on what's happening. The All-Star Squadrons, the Justice League, the Justice Society, and even the crime syndicates. And much like a Stan Lee story, most of the action doesn't go down to so-and-so punches harder, well, except a few times. And while some stories don't have too much action, they're still all crammed with story, and not just pointless padding that you find in today's 5- and 6-issue story arcs. And for the stakes of the story, it doesn't really get much higher than one world being completely destroyed and another world losing its freedom. Just a great epic tale. And artwork-wise, everything looks great. Even Don Heck does a reasonable job with it. But yes, it's a crying shame that George Perez recently left the Justice League of America to work on the new Teen Titans. If he had drawn all 3 issues of the Justice League of America, this story would be even more glorious and amazing. But still, Gonzalez and Orway's issues look great. The outer space battle between Superman and Ultraman is very cool. Now, I might be a little biased in calling this the greatest Justice League of America story ever, because of how I came to this story. At the time, I had a subscription to the Justice League of America. They would just mail them to me in brown paper wrappers. In these pre-internet days, I had no idea what was going to be in the next issue until I slid the brown paper wrapper off the comic book. And when I saw the crime syndicate on the cover, I lost my mind. From borrowing books from the library, remember those? I knew they existed. One book on comic books I borrowed was explaining the multiple Earths, showing pictures of the Justice League, the Justice Society, and the Crime Syndicate. My young little mind wanted to see these guys in action so bad. And when I slipped the brown paper wrapper off Justice League of America number 207, there they were. So for me, this makes the storyline all that more memorable. But seriously, considering everything I just went through, I don't see how anything can top Crisis on Earth Prime. While I admit to not being able to read every single Justice League story ever told, before or since, I have read a lot of them, and none of them really match this epic superhero supervillain showdown. But what do you think? Do you agree with me? Or do you think there's a better Justice League of America story out there? Be sure to let me know, and thanks for spending time with me. And if you could be so kind to like, subscribe, and notify. I won't forget to mention that Justice League of America number 208 even has a 16-page comic book preview of the Masters of the Universe. He-Man.